Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Resilient Advisor Show. My name is Jay Coulter, and joining me for this episode is Chris Versace, the Chief Investment Officer at Tematica Research. Chris, what are we doing today?
Well, Jay, this is part of your investment spotlight series. And what we do from time to time is we like to talk to companies and really put them under the microscope. So not only so we can better understand their business and their opportunities, but so viewers of the show can profit and learn from how we break down and look at companies, but also gather that same knowledge that we are.
Viewers are really going to enjoy this experience. Chris leverages his over 20 years of Wall Street analyst experience to really go deep with our guest. And today's guest is Doug Klopek, who's the founder, chairman, and CEO of Juva Life. Chris, what did you find most interesting about this interview?
Well, generally speaking, Jay, and you know this, I like to learn about up and coming companies, and particularly ones where there's a lot more going on than you might think. I like companies that have, potentially multiple revenue streams, and particularly ones that are eyeing what I consider very attractive, very profitable intellectual property licensing business models. And I think in the case of Juva, many people are going to look at it and they're going to go, oh, cannabis. And they're going to think, oh, what kind of products are they doing? What's the time to market? How are they going to distribute? What's the issues, with cannabis and legality in different states, federal level, all that stuff. And that's all true. And Doug does a great job of getting under the hood with that aspect of the Juva business model. But what really stood out to me is how Doug is really laser focused on the life science opportunities ahead of the company. And we'll hear Doug describe all that. It's part of the business. And it's akin to that higher margin licensing business model that I talked about, which for most investors, when you think of like a Qualcomm, a Rambus, or even an InterDigital, that's what we're talking about here, except it's really focused in on the life sciences space. And that space is really getting a lot of attention, whether it's, genomics, small molecules, or the like. So this is a very different conversation about a very different company.
Yeah, definitely a different type of company, a different type of industry for most people. And I really enjoyed sitting there and watching you go through your question set to help pick apart the company. But before we get to the actual interview, what do you think investors and people considering allocations need to be mindful of as they watch this interview?
Well, I think it's fair to say that Juva's a development company, and while it appears it has sufficient capital to carry it forward, you're going to want to understand what are the milestones and the timelines, right, that let you know as an investor that Doug and his team are delivering as expected. And the great thing about the conversation is Doug shares these milestones. He's going to tell us when they're going to harvest their first crop, what's the timeline for the facility construction, as well as the 2021 milestones for the life sciences part of the business, which again, these are 2021 milestones. It tells you that there's more there, right? More there, as it were, Jay, than simply an idea or a concept that has to be fleshed out. And for frame of reference, the company has a great investor presentation, which you can get from their website. Some of these milestones are laid out on page 12 and 13 of the current investor deck. The other thing too is the company, currently trades on the OTC, and that's great. It's a publicly traded company, no stigma associated with that. But the question is, when will it start to get a lot more institutional following? Generally speaking, there are two hurdles that you want to watch for there. First one is when the share price gets closer to and then passes the $5 level. That tends to attract a lot more attention on the institutional side. And then the second is an uplisting either to a NASDAQ flavor or a NYSE flavor listing. Those are the two big things that I think folks will really want to pay attention to. But what about you, Jay? Was there anything that jumped out at you that kind of stood out?
Yeah. So, in particular, because of some of the work we've been doing in crypto research, there seems to be similarities between how his space is growing and how the crypto space is growing. So, I think, viewers of this interview might see some of those similarities as well.
Yeah, I think you're right on that. I mean, there's a lot of the new thing here. Again, genomics, life sciences, small molecule, crypto. What's nice about this is that Doug really breaks down the opportunity as well as how Juva is attacking that opportunity.
All right, before we get to the interview, here are our disclosures. Jay Coulter and Chris Versace do not own any interest in JUVA or JUVAF. They will not take a position nor put into any of the investment portfolios and products they oversee within 30 days of the initial broadcast, which is slated for February 20th, 2021.
All right, Jay, let's get to that interview.
Doug Klopek is the founder, chairman, and CEO of Juva Life. His company has recently gone public, listing on the Canadian Securities Exchange under the symbol JUVA and on the OTC market under the symbol JUVAF. Doug, let's dig right in. What is the opportunity with Juva?
Well, Juva is unlike just about any other cannabis and or life science company currently on the market. I specifically developed this company to utilize the cannabis infrastructure and supply chain in the state of California that I've operated in for the last 12 years and bridge that with a life science biotech company. So I utilize the infrastructure from the cannabis supply chain to revenue stream the company to offset the cost on life science deep dive, particular into the small molecule anti-inflammatory opportunities as they present themselves with the 5,000 molecular compounds in cannabis, and understanding that through scientific modalities that are currently available through FDA process and protocol.
So, Doug, there's a lot to unpack in that statement. I think that's fair. If I heard you correctly, you're tapping the consumer aspect of cannabis, looking to grow the business and position and take advantage of opportunities on the medicinal side.
Little bit. It's really, I created two dual channels in this company. One is what most people understand as cannabis. And I think if you unpack that just a little bit, because that segues directly into the life science component.
Okay.
Part of this, if I kind of digress a little bit, I've done this in cannabis in California for the last 12 years. So this is not, I've opened and sold a dozen, give or take, of these companies in the last 12 years.
And Doug, let me just so we understand and the audience understands, when you say these types of companies, can you be a little more specific when you say cannabis? Because there's various parts of the food chain, as you know. There are growers, there are manufacturers, there are various types of products, and then there, how it gets distributed. So perhaps understanding that background would kind of help us understand what you're building towards when you describe Juva's competitive advantage.
Absolutely. So I've done all of them. It is a simple form. I've owned 2 of the 16 licensed cannabis dispensaries in the city of San Jose. So it's the 10th largest market in the United States. Opened the first dispensary back in 2010. I am actually the 3,037th person to ever legally use cannabis in the state of California back in 1997.
Do you have that on a card somewhere?
I do. I actually I do. All the way back to 1997. It became legal in 96, and in early 97, I was the 3,037th person to legally be able to use cannabis in the state of California. So very early adopter in the legal side of the market. When I opened the first dispensary, I very quickly realized that there's a lack of consistency in the market. So I quickly opened an indoor nursery so we could self-supply some of our product at our retail store. I then realized that the consumers only buy the best and the bottom. That's it. Everything else in the middle is just noise.
Now, why is that?
It's just how the market works. They either want the top shelf connoisseur premium, or they want the budget. How much can I get, and what's just going to be the biggest bang for the buck? And if you're kind of the mid-grade in the middle, there's a lot of people that think they should be there, and really it's noise.
Interesting. That does explain a lot of the wine at the grocery store by me that's never touched.
There you go.
Okay, fair enough.
And so I then opened a sun-grown nursery, so we could facilitate low cost, high quality product that targeted that kind of consumer looking at the bang for their buck, and then also the top end. I needed a distribution company so I could move it all around. So I started a distribution company. I needed a couple of brands so I could put them under brands. So I started a couple of brands that I then sold through distribution to the California retail market. After a few years, I quickly realized that this thing that I thought I was going to open to make a ton of money and sit on a beach and never have to work was really not that. It was a labor of love. I lived off my savings for 2 years as I just ground it out and made it work. What that availed itself to was really a massive gap in the industry, which was the lack of true science. Going back to 2014 and fast forward till today, it's two steps away from snake oil, whether it's CBD or it's a cannabis formulated product, and you got hundreds of SKUs at most places, and many people unethically tout that it'll cure everything from hemorrhoids to acne to cancer to epilepsy. And honestly, that's part of the FDA and the FTC issues that you're currently seeing now that they're coming full circle around. And it started my mission to say there's a real science behind here. Nobody knows what the real science is. There's a real need here for people who are really sick. I saw people coming in who were dying of AIDS, who were wasting from many diseases, who had cancer. And I saw how the product that I thought I was just going to make a lot of money off of actually changed their lives. It gave real benefit.
So Doug, how do you traverse that? Because your experience, boots on the ground in the industry, seeing it for what it is, how do you make that jump to the deep science? Because that doesn't, no disrespect intended, that doesn't seem like that's your background.
It's not.
Okay.
It's not. My background is not in molecular chemistry, small molecule chemistry. It's not in that. Actually, my background really is in sales. I'm a people person, and I grew up selling, religious literature when I was young, door to door.
Quite the turn, Doug.
It was. I grew up selling Bibles and knocking on people's doors for 15 years of my early life, and realized it wasn't the path for me. And then went into the cannabis industry, kind of polar opposite. But that's a whole nother story. That's another show.
Yeah, we don't need to know how you went running and screaming, from one to the other. It's okay.
Yeah. We'll leave that one alone. But what it really did is it availed itself that we needed science. Right. So in 2014, I started the mission to create a research and manufacturing lab. I think one of my strongest suits is knowing how to organize teams and put projects together. I would say I'm really good at putting the right ass in the right seat at the right time. And if I have to stop the bus, I rearrange the bus, but the bus keeps moving. And that's really it.
So in my experience, when you see companies kind of making this transition for something like what you're trying to do, the advisory board is key.
It is.
So can you talk to that? Who's on your board? Are they the ones who are really helping you navigate the science of this?
I can. And right before I get into that board, what I think is imperative to touch on is in 2014 through 2016, I attempted to open the very first licensed manufacturing and research center in California, to which I did. I own permit number 1 in the state of California for manufacturing and research in cannabis, issued by the city of Berkeley in 2016. It's the very first permit ever issued in the 7th largest economy in the world. I subsequently sold that permit when my partners did not want to continue down the deep science road. And then in 2018, when I sold that, I started Juva. That's when I merged my companies together. I took over a former cancer research institution. They raised $28 million on a US government grant. They never took a product public, burned through their money. I have a $5 million class 5 clean room. They were growing genetically modified tobacco in these greenhouses, extracting the plant proteins, and they went out of business. I had the good fortune to take it over before I started Juva, because I was going to create this type of company. Merged them.
Hopefully you picked it up cents on the dollar.
I did. It was a good acquisition on our part. And then I started the mission to really raise the initial funds that I needed, and we'll talk about the raises and the capital structure of the company in a second. Raise the proper funds needed to really build out the real science side. And I always intended to build this business on 2 pathways. Use my decades of cannabis experience, because we know how to grow it, how to sell it. We know how to make money in cannabis. And then bring the proper people with the right scientific background to build the science component and leverage the retail cannabis side to fund the research side, to not have this never-ending dilution and raising money that typically happens in many research companies. And we've created that pathway.
So is it fair to say that, and maybe this is the wrong term, when I say consumer facing, maybe it's recreational facing business, That's the near-term opportunity, it sounds like, and the cash flow generator that's going to fund the rest of the business.
Correct.
Okay. Okay. So from that perspective, you've got, if I did my homework correctly, and I think I did, you've got a couple pieces of that business. You've got Juva Manufacturing, you've got the research, which is part of the other part of the business you're talking about, but then there's delivery and retail. So it's that consumer facing or recreational facing business is three of those four buckets. Is that correct?
And cultivation. So it's
Okay.
indoor, high grade indoor cultivation. We just finished completing a 30-month build, spent just about $10 million building a state-of-the-art facility. That facility will produce right around 215 to 225 pounds of cannabis every 12 days. Basically, that's give or take $18 million a year worth of indoor high grade cultivated cannabis. We have that's at our Stockton facility. At our Hayward facility, we have the greenhouse cultivation, which kind of goes back to that very early days of producing the high quality, low cost input that goes for part of our extraction.
Mm-hmm.
We have manufacturing, which is at the Hayward facility. We have delivery business, direct to consumer delivery at our Stockton Central Valley and also in Redwood City. We are in a competitive process to acquire a new brick and mortar delivery business in the heart of downtown Redwood City. Fairly confident that we'll achieve that here. We'll know in about 6-8 weeks. We have a brick and mortar delivery business or brick and mortar store out of our Hayward facility that is currently under construction, along with distribution from Stockton and Hayward as well. So really created a complete infrastructure supply chain, and all of those are components that then support the research side with input material, controlled input, distribution, delivery, and the manufacturing processes that we can control.
Can we stick with that first business? Because I do have a couple of questions on that. And then I just want to segue to the other. So it's really two distinct conversations, if that's okay.
Sure.
So you're vertically integrated. A lot of companies tend to do that. There's an argument for, cost savings. I imagine there's some here too as well. But when I hear you talk, it really sounds more like you need to ensure the quality of your product.
Correct.
And does that get back to what you said earlier about there being a lot of snake oil?
Yep.
and that you're just, perhaps for the listener, how hard is it to get quality ingredients in this industry?
Since that's a pretty loaded question. Pre-legalization, pre-2018, I'd say 70+% of the product that came to my manufacturing center, I had to reject because it was tainted material with either heavy metals, chemicals, or pesticides.
Okay.
Now, that is almost non-existent because in order for it to leave, it has to go through a distribution channel. The distribution channel has to test it. It has to meet certain parts per billion. Literally, cannabis is tested at a stricter level than the organic fruit you buy at your store. Most of the organic fruit you buy at your store will fail my cannabis testing protocols.
Doug,
which is sad.
You're not making me feel good right now.
I know, I'm sorry.
That's okay. It's all right. It happens. So clearly quality control, but it's not just growing. So you have your own manufacturing facility. And I know I have some friends that are in the food business and they develop a product and they ship it out and it's developed and packaged by co-packers. Are you doing this to preserve your recipes, or is there some other reason why you want to be this vertically integrated?
Part of it is to control the supply chain. Most of the problems, and again, this comes from 12 years of running these type of businesses and understanding the problems. There's a lot of VC and hedge fund money that's dumped into the industry in the last 7 years. You've seen a historic failure of these 10 and 20, $30 million cash influxes because the people running them really didn't understand how the businesses have to run. They just thought if I throw enough money at it, I'll make it work. And that's not how it works. If you're a manufacturer, but you don't have cultivation, now you're completely reliant on the cultivators to supply input material, whether they go dry, whether you have supply chain problems. If you're a cultivator, but you don't have distribution and retail, now you're completely reliant on the distribution channels to hold you hostage to sell your products. So there's a this wasn't by accident that I built this company.
Right. I was going to say, given your 12 years, you've had a lot of time to see, the positives, the negatives, the trials, the tribulations of the industry, and methodically plan for what you were going to do. That's what it sounds like to me.
Completely.
Okay. A couple other questions. I noticed in your investor relations presentation that under manufacturing, you're talking about obviously having your own products, but you're also talking about white labeling products.
Mm-hmm.
This kind of caught me off guard a little bit. Are these totally different products? Are they simply repackaged products? I know some consumer product companies, they will have like one particular product for Costco, one particular product for Walmart. And at the end of the day, the products are themselves very similar. There's different packaging, different colors. What it helps the manufacturer do is really drive efficiencies and utilization at the plant. Because if you're retooling every so many SKUs, retooling so many units for different SKUs, it becomes a real productivity issue.
Correct. So we have the infrastructure that we need for our business purpose, but because we have the infrastructure, it avails itself to a white label third-party processing. So somebody can bring us, once we have the Hayward facility completed, they could bring us, 1,000 pounds. They could bring us 5,000 pounds of their cannabis. We'll process their cannabis. We'll give it back to them in their final form that they're looking for. If they are looking to then have that oil or that distillate or that isolate or that particular cannabinoid separation, because we'll have all the technologies for our own internal protocols.
Right.
There's no reason to not put them through the supply.
Right. So you just said something there that really kind of jumped out at me, which was they need to bring the inputs to you.
Correct.
Okay. So it's not
input as well. Both. Both.
Okay.
So that there's a toll processing component of the business. There's also a bulk wholesale of our own product or product that we acquire, manufacture, and then sell back to the market. So there's multiple revenue streams, and then there's the final form product. Since we'll have our smaller capacity for tablets, capsules, sublinguals, transdermals. If someone's looking for those particulars and wanting to put their own product in, we wouldn't use our exact formula. But at the end of the day, it's some changes. It's a label change, and it's a simple swap, as you just mentioned.
And to the extent you can talk about it, are the margins better on the white label product or better on the premium product that I presume is yours?
I mean, the margins will be better on the premium product. It just becomes an additional revenue source for the business. So once that facility is completed its construction, it literally just continues to have the revenue coming in. And as we'll talk about in a minute, that's actually not my core business. That's what is easily understood by the market because cannabis is a hot topic right now. But that's actually not my core business. So that's just the support for my core business, which is really the biotech, life science, small molecule drug development component of our business.
Right. And I want to get to that. I apologize. The equity analyst to me just has to ask a couple other questions here. Who are the types of partners you're looking for on this white label business? I mentioned, Costco. I mean, they could be one. Walmart. Is that the type as these other companies look to really get into this business, or is this more someone who just needs a effective vertical manufacturer to build the product for them?
So unfortunately, in the California marketplace, you have to be a California licensed, whatever that is, cultivator, manufacturer, distributor, retailer, in order to touch a THC infused product in California. So Kirkland or Costco they could not come to us and say, can you manufacture X for us? However, there's, I don't know, I think there's about 400 different brands, manufacturers, products, retailers who are in the market who then can say, you grow amazing flower. We want to take your flower, you package it, put our labeling on it, and then sell it to us, and that'll be our in-house brand. Right. So that's part of how the business model works.
Okay. And are you guys anywhere on that? Can you?
We actually we're just planting literally this. I think it's on Tuesday of this coming week. We are planting our very first crop which we can now set our clocks to substantial revenue from our cultivation facility.
Okay. All right. Let's jump over to Juva Research, which I believe is the business that you really want to talk about.
That is what makes me really excited.
No, it's look, anytime you see somebody coming in and trying to shake things up, I get excited, right? And what you're talking about, you've said the word science and really trying to not legitimize. I don't think that's what you're trying to do. I think you're trying to propel forward the class of products that are out there in general, and then also try and really tap into another market that a lot of people, think about when they talk about using marijuana, whether it's cancer patients or something like that. But you're trying to attack it with data and bring about just a better class of product, I think.
Yeah, and I think the simplest way is we have developed a disruptive pathway to create new naturally formulated products and get them into humans faster than any other protocol currently available. And I think that there's a deep dive into that, but that's really what we created.
So English, when you say a protocol to do that, I think of look, I will take drops right before I go to bed, right? I know that there are creams, there are lotions, there's all sorts of stuff. If you, to the extent you could be more specific, I think that would be helpful.
Sure. Currently, there's kind of 3 to 4 pathways to get products created. There's the pharmaceutical pathway. That's a 5 to 10 year process. That is the standard drug development pathway. That's NIDA approval. That's irrelevant of cannabis. That's the NIDA approval, right. The FDA approvals, the in vitro, the animal studies, the human phase 1, phase 2, multi-phase studies. That's that FDA. That's how pharmaceutical industry works.
Correct.
If you're looking to create something touching, plant touching, cannabis touching, then you have to go through a separate set of approvals. You have to grab the cannabis once approved from NIDA through the Missouri farm. It is a very long, very cumbersome process and a very flawed process currently, which is the reason why Dr. Sue Sisley is currently suing the FDA for providing inferior product that she cannot actually test and run her research on because the government supplied product is inferior and fundamentally flawed.
Are you saying the government didn't deliver the best product?
That is unfortunately, that is actually exactly what's currently happening right now.
You see where I'm going with that. Sorry.
I do. The FDA, this is not a poke at the FDA, so I'll just put out the disclaimer there. There is a purpose and a need for the FDA, and we respect the FDA and what the FDA does. So I don't want that to be misconstrued. However, the current process to acquire input material for researchers to do real science on is currently and fundamentally flawed. And that is part of the historic problem why you've seen companies like GW Pharmaceutical move to the UK, where they were able to do and access the proper cultivated cultivars, do their processes, do the real research, and have that now become, as you just know, and I'm sure we'll touch on, it's over a $7 billion acquisition.
Right.
And they still follow the FDA process. Different than, and then you have the nutraceutical pathway, which is really, they're kind of making anything, they're making claims, they're not making claims. Right. It's a wild, wild west. And then you have the Juva process and the Juva pathway, which is this fourth leg that, in my opinion, in my team's opinion, we have created a pathway to get there bigger, better, faster with the same type of validated data. I think that's the simplest way of putting that.
So what are the hurdles that you have to encounter to get there? Because in my experience, whenever there's a new channel, a new process, it takes time to be validated. Where are you in that?
I think that is where having the right people in the right seat on the bus is critically important. So what I have done is I have created a pathway that uses Western IRB approved protocol. So for those who may not know what that is, that's the Western Institutional Review Board. That's an organization that's overseen by the FDA, that when you're going to do human subject research or patient reported outcomes, there is a process and a protocol that you submit and they review that. Not like the FDA, but in a similar type of process. It protects the patients, it protects the data, it protects the physicians, it makes sure that you're capturing this data in an appropriate way, that the data is going to be used appropriately, that it's safe for the humans to use. So there's a whole series of protocols. And this isn't just like, hey, Susie, take this, how did you feel? This uses, depending on how elaborate we get into it, DNA swabs, blood screenings. Every patient is seen by an actual physician. They have to go either virtually or in person to an actual physician. This is not an easy process. And
Stringent.
This is very, very stringent. Okay. We received we received IRB approval about 5-6 months ago for our patient research registry, which consists of 6 specific targeted ailments and up to 2,000 patients for our first research registry. We have 3 products that we have identified. They are not products that we manufacture. They are 3 kind of best-in-class products currently available in California that we feel from decade plus of working with patients that are best anecdotally associated or potentially could help for these type of ailments that we're first targeting. That will create our baseline. So we are onboarding these first patients here over the course of the next couple of weeks. I'm very, very excited. This has been years in the works.
And is the goal, as you move through this path, to bring on, and I apologize if this is the wrong word to use, I can't think of any other, but develop your own medicinal products, so that as you go through this and your pathway is approved, you can then slide your products right in.
That is actually very, very in tune with the pathway. So this creates the fundamental baseline of what are the best in class currently available on market products. They either did work, they didn't work, they might have worked, or what's the variance between them. While that is currently happening, we have an entire another segment. So that's on the research, patient touching research side. I have an entire chemistry department that we haven't even talked about yet. The chemistry department, while the patient research is happening, the chemistry department has already, in essence, identified and chronologued the 5,000 molecular compounds found in cannabis. People usually associate, because they hear about it, CBD or THC.
Right.
Well, those are 2 of about 5,000. There's flavonoids, there's terpenes, there's phytocannabinoids, there's primary cannabinoids, there's all of these other pieces. Each one of them, individually or collectively in compound, have an effect on the human body. We have created a process to use approved pharmaceutical and standard FDA protocol to systematically study them, cross-reference and assay them against standard baselines that are commercially available. While that's happening on the chemistry side, we have the research side that's actually having real people taking real product. That's going to create the baseline, and then that's cross-referenced against what we know from the chemistry side, and that then gives our next round of highly formulated targeted products that will be Juvo products that go back into the registry. And I don't know if they're going to work or not, but we're going to find the answer, and we are highly confident that they will be far superior. And our real target is small molecule inflammation. The root of basically every disease, not every, almost all diseases are inflammation. And that is a multi-trillion-dollar global market.
So a couple questions when I hear all of this. You'll be sitting on a lot of data.
Correct.
And there's other companies in different industries that they have very profitable licensing business models. Is that something you're entertaining?
We're actually specifically, and see this, it's a good point. You're very, very insightful there, my friend. I built this company with one idea in mind, that we're going to build it to sell it. and we're building it specifically for the data that'll be acquired. Now, because I thought it was supposed to be built one way, I put the right people in the right seat, and we've had to shift that around a little bit. And I think this is actually really critical to talk about a few of these people at this point, which is directly to your question there. So Dr. Guy Miller is the chairman of my chemistry department. He's a PhD, MD, PhD. There's not many of those around. He's an MD, PhD. Sold one of his previous companies for over $1 billion to Johnson & Johnson as a natural drug development product. He is an advisor to Johnson & Johnson. He's also a associate professor at Johns Hopkins University with DARPA federal government clearance. Needless to say, he is a powerhouse in his own right. Yeah. Directly underneath him is my vice president of chemistry, who's Dr. Sanjeev Garwal. Sanjeev just left from Bristol Myers Squibb, that little small $139 billion market cap.
Those guys.
Sanjeev, at his company before Bristol Myers, he created what's known as one of the most profitable pharmaceutical acquisitions in history. He created a cancer therapeutic that last year, Johnson & Johnson and Bristol Myers Squibb did over $20 billion on the therapeutic that Sanjeev created with his co-creator at their previous company. Bristol Myers, 3 days after the first human I think there was 3 human subjects that took this product. I think it was within 3 to 4 days after they saw a positive effect, they purchased their company for $2 billion. So he has gone along. He was the oncology, I think he was the director of oncology research and inflammation at Bristol Myers Squibb for the last 6 or 8 years. Don't quote me on that. And he left Bristol Myers to be my vice president of chemistry because of the opportunity that we have in front of us.
So Doug, I have a much better understanding now of when we were talking earlier and you were like, yeah, there's this other stuff over here, but I'm really excited about this.
Yes.
Because it has an opportunity to really, not shake things up, have a lasting imprint, but there's a notion of doing something good as well.
Yes.
You know what I mean? It's not like, oh yeah, we're gonna hit the recreational cannabis market and blah blah blah. I mean, the work you're doing could pave the way to something that is, I don't say this lightly, revolutionary in terms of how we treat illness.
Correct. Absolutely. And how we develop new products and get them into humans faster.
Right.
And one thing that's critically important is the data that we will acquire from the research registries is on par equivalent to a phase 2A, phase 2B clinical study from the pharmaceutical industry. It will take them 5 to 7 years to get to phase 2A, phase 2B typically.
Right.
I can get there in 6 months to less than a year because of the pathway. We already know cannabis is safe. We already know cannabis works on some level. We already know people use it. Those are the 3 fundamental problems that the pharmaceutical industry is always trying to unlock. Now it's just a matter of who does it work for? How does it work? How do we repeat that process? And how do we ensure that we can then get that into a cycle and into humans to really create a positive effect?
Yeah, there's another part to it though that's a little fascinating. One of our investment themes at Tematica is cleaner living, and you're talking about reducing the number of ingredients, non-GMO, organic, natural in particular. And when I think about this, I almost wonder if what you're going to do is help pull that into that mentality into the medical cannabis industry, right? Because it's not like
goosebumps.
Yeah. Sorry. It's not like you're sitting there and you're going, okay, inside this pill is these ingredients, and they conflict with this over here, blah blah blah. You're talking about a natural occurring substance, and mining and crafting a product so that it's optimized to deal with a particular problem.
Correct. That's That's as simple as you can state it. Yes. You know,
So how do you know if you're on track, right? Because one of the big things for companies, and I think for people who are trying to follow along, investors, shareholders, is a number of different industries. There's all sorts of data out there, that you can track on a weekly, monthly, quarterly basis. But for this in particular, there's a couple moving pieces, right? So like where I live in Virginia. Cannabis was just legalized, right?
mhm,
So in initial hurdle cleared, so to speak. But there's banking issues. There's still issues on the federal level, and then there's all the things that you're talking about, really on the, and let's just throw them in the medical bucket,
mhm.
right? And I noticed that you're in California, which seems to be very, I think, friendly towards what you're trying to do. So it spurs up with some other questions, right? So what are you watching to make sure that you're on path, that you're flexing where you can to speed the path of what you're trying to do? How do you know if you hit a roadblock? And then, the ultimate question is, if you're going to grow the company, how do you move past California?
Yeah. Uh, Very good questions. And I think that aligns directly to one of your previous statements about licensing or data. Um,
Okay.
I actually don't have, it's funny, I was asked this question by some of the big investment bankers at Toronto Mackey just a couple of days ago. And they were saying, okay, well, this is great. So what's your plan to go to the next state or expand your cultivation?
Right.
And my answer was simply,
Why?
I
Why? Why
actually,
is your answer? Why would I do that when when I have this very profitable business
that's
that
it.
I can license out? Because
That's it.
licensing, I mean, look, when I was doing my homework, I'm looking at, okay, so we got products, we got retail. I know margins are thin at retail, delivery. Okay, you're hitting the customer, but margins on that aren't huge either. What you're talking about here, though, and this gets back to what I was saying, and I apologize for hijacking the conversation. It's that recreational facing business is funding this potentially disruptive business.
Correct. 100%. 100%.
Okay, so back to my questions.
Yeah. So my answer to them was, I actually am not looking to expand. Expanding, building more facilities is actually just a distraction to my fundamental
Right,
business.
right.
I'm not looking to distract for pennies when I have dollars to gain, and
Right.
that's really how I look at this. We will easily, I don't say easily, but I mean, I expect that we'll be 18 to 40, $50 million in revenue just through our cannabis based business infrastructure once all the components are kind of fully built out. But that, in my opinion, is a drop in the bucket compared to the $1 to $4 billion
Right.
pharmaceutical acquisition that we are actually building this company specifically for. So the science, when I go back to say, just because I thought we were supposed to do a pathway one way, that actually has shifted. The pathway and the way we are collecting data, the way we are systematically understanding, distilling this very complex plant into easy to understand, formulated, systematic processes that uses some of the standard FDA approved processes and pharmaceutical pathways commercially and currently available. So while that is happening, the data we are collecting is data that is immensely valuable for the company that will acquire us, which we're looking at one of possibly 20 global pharmaceutical companies that have the ability to spend $1 to $4 or $5 billion on an acquisition. And they're not going to buy us because we're making 40 or $50 million a year on cannabis. They're
No.
going to acquire us because we have a data set
Yeah,
that
the
we
IP.
tested in humans with a patent portfolio that can expedite their FDA approved drug development process by 3 to 7 years.
So
That is the
so
reason why we will be acquired.
right. So just two questions on that. A minute ago, you said when all the pieces are in place.
Mhm.
Okay. When do you expect that to be?
Sure. So the cultivation is at the cultivation facility. We have 3 of our 5 rooms fully built, and we're planting the first room. So over the course of the next 4.5 months, we will complete the rest of the build out. So we're 30 months in, it'll be about a 36 to 37 month total build time at that facility. We've completed demolition of our Hayward facility, and we're starting to build that back. We expect that to be fully complete in roughly 12 to 15 months from today. The lab operation should be operational in roughly 6 months from today, so we can start some of the chemistry and laboratory components in the lab side.
Okay. So you're not selling any product yet?
We are selling direct to consumer delivery via our delivery products from Stockton and also from our Redwood City location. So we are generating revenue. We've been generating revenue for about a year and a half. It's kind of incremental revenue. The real revenue will really come from the $500,000 harvest that'll start really generating real revenue. And then the manufacturing from the Hayward facility, when that comes online in roughly 6 months, there's immense opportunity to generate large revenue very fast from that.
So in terms of the balance sheet and capital, what you're talking about, what I hear, and correct me if I'm wrong, is you're burning capital now.
Yes,
correct?
we've been burning capital.
Okay. And how much
And
runway?
deploying a lot in capital infrastructure improvements. We spent over $10 million building our cultivation facility.
Right. So in terms of, capital on hand, how much runway do you have? And is there a point? It sounds like there's a point at which you're going to need to raise more capital to continue, right? How do you ensure that you get as much runway as you can out of what you have? Because things do happen. And I think this gets back to my question in terms of how do you know that you're tracking correctly?
Correct. So I think the answer to there goes back to kind of how the capital infrastructure of this company has been built from kind of day one. So that's probably very important just to touch on. So we did our very initial raise, which was given in US dollars. If I'm converting Canadian to US, we raised just about 6 million Canadian dollars at 28 cents US with about a 50-cent half warrant. That was when we first did our initial raise back in Canada. Subsequent to that, we did a Regulation A+ filing. So we were one of the very first Regulation A+ plant touching deals that went through back in, this is I guess about a year and a half ago. We did a 50-cent financing. We raised $18 million at 50 cents US with a 75-cent half warrant. We brought in just about 4,000 shareholders through that Reg A raise. We had a great partnership and a lot of support from Palm Beach Financial and the Agora Publishing Network. We were their very first Reg A deal they ever did. They launched their entire Reg A platform based on us. From there, we baked in that 75-cent half warrant, anticipating where we are today, knowing that we would deploy a good most of that capital through capital infrastructure and build out and research costs. That landed us where we are today. So we are in the process of bringing in, we had roughly about $19 million worth of warrants that were sitting out there. We brought in about I'd have to look. It's a running total, 5 or 6 million of that over the course of the last 3 weeks. We just closed a $10 million financing. That money should hit our bank on the 19th or 22nd of this month. That was a special warrant financing that was at, I think it was about 82 or 83 cents US. So we just brought in that 10 million and we're now bringing in the warrant money. I expect we'll bring in somewhere between another $4 and $11 million of that warrant money. So by the end of this month, I'm fairly confident we'll have somewhere between $14 to $20 million in the bank by the end of this month.
And that'll last you how long based on your capital plan?
Knock on wood, as the growth is, I don't foresee us needing to do another capital raise. And I say that slightly loaded because at our current run rate and valuation, if we do another raise, we're hopeful that won't come for at least 6 to 12 months. And that'll be after we hit a number of very large KPIs on the chemistry side with a substantial boost in market cap.
Can you share what some of the KPIs you might be targeting are, or at least, if not the actual hurdles themselves, but the types of KPIs?
Sure. Some of those are clearly identifying through the chemistry department which one and in what combination some of the cannabinoids have the highest probability of affecting human condition and what those conditions are for. The enrollment of the first 10 patients, which we're actually expecting that to happen here over just next 2 to 3 weeks. But really that's then getting us to our first 100 patients and then our first 500 patients. And then the data derived from that first set is going to be another big KPI. And then how that data then overlaps with our chemistry findings and then having the first formulated products go back into humans.
So it sounds like you're going to have, you'll know if you're clearing your hurdles in a handful of months in between, not quarters.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, we built this company to be extremely nimble and utilize the tools currently available to expedite pathways that typically take years to condense those down into months.
And as you do this, I imagine you're consulting with patent attorneys on how to protect yourself. Both in I imagine that's not only on the data that you're creating, but the solutions as well.
Correct. So I think two things to note. Sanjeev, our vice president of chemistry, as I'd mentioned, he is actually a patent powerhouse. So he has 45 patents to his career in the small molecule anti-inflammatory and oncology space over the course of the next over his last 15 years in pharmaceutical. Additional to that, we have, I think we have now 26 globally recognized trademarks around different components of the business. And as soon as we start rolling out these proprietary formulas, those will then go into and for patent protection once we show some form of efficacy around each of those. And one thing that I hadn't mentioned, which is I think almost as critically important, is the research side. The research folks who are working with us, Dr. Rakesh Patel, he's a world recognized oncology research physician. He's also the chairman of an organization called TME. TME is called Targeted Medical Education. They are disruptors in the oncology and inflammation space. So they have a global network of disruptive researchers, clinical researchers, patient-touching researchers who participate in their network to really see how they can disrupt the current modalities of treating patients. One of those folks who are also part of the co-founding group of TME is Dr. Peter Beisch. Dr. Peter Beisch is the former president of the U.S. Breast Surgeons Society of America. So he oversaw roughly 4,000 breast surgeons in the United States. So these are not pot docs. These are globally recognized physicians.
I'm amazed at this bench that you have. How did you corral all these people?
Well, going back to selling Bible literature as I grew up for my entire life. But really, I'm relentless in the vision. I had a vision. I knew what I wanted to create. I knew I didn't have the skill set or the knowledge to get there. And I set out on a pathway to find the smartest people who could get us to where I know this company needs to be.
And when you're sharing this vision with them, does a light go off in their head?
Yeah.
Like, Doug, people are chasing this over here. They're doing this over here. We haven't seen anything like this. And do they get, it sounds like they are as excited about this as you are. Otherwise, why would they become part of the advisory board?
Yeah. No, that's you're 100% spot on. Wow. I've had so many people say, well, why aren't you doing this? And I say, you know what? I'll let everybody fight over the shiny fish lure, because you know what? The cannabis market is like, what's the shiniest package with the strongest widget in the smallest thing that gives me the biggest bang for the buck? And you know what? You guys can all fight for the shelf space because there's thousands of SKUs that are all basically the same with a different marketing brand and scheme.
No, but Doug, this one is cinnamon, this one is lemon.
Oh yes. And it'll fix your hemorrhoids just like your cancer. And we have to get away from that. And we attempt and are doing our best to debunk, really the BS that's out there. Because at the end of the day, it's real science.
So kind of with that, how are you guys driving thought leadership? And it's one thing to do it in the medical community where I understand that that's your big focus. But are there journals that you guys are publishing papers in, white papers that you're releasing? Is there anything like that the investor who really wants to dig into what you're doing can read and have their own aha moment?
There will be.
Okay.
I think that's the best thing to say is when you look into the future, you have to base the future off of the past. And when you look at the history of my team, and where they've come from and the reason why they're participating, that dictates how we're moving forward. So we will have, Dr. Rakesh Patel has over 100 globally published papers in peer-reviewed medical journals. Sanjeev has over 40 published papers. Dr. Peter Beisch, he, along with part of his team, recently published a paper that talks about vitamin K. You probably don't know this, but people, I think and don't quote me on the exacts, I think there's 48% of the people in the world who have a particular genetic defect. That means 52% do not.
Jay's one of them.
Hey, if
I have a couple.
You have the same type of cancer, going through the same type of cancer treatment, and you take a high dose of vitamin K, and again, I might mix up the specific,
right,
but if you have a high dose of vitamin K and you have this genetic defect, it'll reduce your cancer size by like 70%. If you take the same cancer therapeutic and high dose vitamin K and you're the 52% without the defect, it'll increase your cancer replicating in the human body. These are personalized medicines, pharmacogenetics. This is precision medicine based on people's predisposed genetic conditions.
Right.
We're just learning about this in the world of medicine right now. And that is why seeing this kind of disruptive component, that's why everyone on the medical side is so excited to participate.
So, I mean, again, I don't want to sound like a cheerleader because I don't mean to be, but I'm getting excited here because I'm thinking of just the overall acceptance of cannabis, period. I'm thinking about what we're seeing on the genomics front. And we're also thinking about the individual acceptance for things like GenoPalette and things like that, where people are already trying to, from a mindset perspective, tweak what they're doing to meet their own DNA.
Correct.
You could very well be, Doug, in the sweet spot.
Yes. Not by accident and very much by design. Actually, to go back to 2018, the company that I started is actually called Precision Apothecary. So
okay.
Based on precision medicine. So in 2018, it was Precision Apothecary to really create precision-based plant formulations to target ailments in the human body. And that mission hasn't changed. It's only become exponentially more refined with a better team and the right capital to achieve our goal.
Now, Jay, any questions before I ask Doug the last and probably most important question?
Yes. So I would like to take just a step back and look at it from an industry standpoint. So you were describing something in the beginning where you were talking about how the FDA and all the hack people in this space kind of create this stigma around the industry. Yet when I look at the cryptocurrency space, I see Bitcoin as a thought leader, and then you have the garbage that is Dogecoin. And I feel like the industries are evolving at the same time. How is cannabis going to go and clean up that reputation from an industry standpoint so that it is commonly allocated to inside of a financial advisor's portfolio?
I think you're starting to see that shift with part of the administration shift on the U.S. level with the commitment to have some form of legalization. Whether that does or does not happen actually has zero effect for us as a company. Us as a company, actually, the barrier to entry state remains high. It's probably actually a benefit for us. it comes down, then there's an ability to raise, exponentially more institutional capital, but we haven't had any issues raising capital to date, knock on wood. Specific to your question of industry stigma, I think industry stigma really comes when there's enough science to back it. I think seeing, pharmaceutically approved products like GW Pharmaceutical, a $7.9 billion acquisition by Jazz helps to entrench the reason why there's some validity to what's happening now. People historically, especially with COVID, are and have been skeptical of just everything they hear. We hear wear a mask, don't wear a mask. We hear take a shot, don't take a shot. We hear eat vitamins, don't eat vitamins. And so many people have really looked to see what's a natural way. I don't necessarily always want to pump a pill into me or take a shot or, I eat this and it reacts with that. We're truly looking at not the issue, not treating necessarily
symptom
cancer as much as why do you get cancer? That's because of an inflammation component. So I think the more science, real science, not, drink this elixir and it'll help you, like real science that actually is validated through standard protocol, not just Jane took it, Jane felt better, and like everybody needs to eat this.
Right. Backed by science.
Yeah, it's evolving, and I think it's just going to be a matter of time. And I'd like to think that we're leading the charge and far ahead of the curve on that, which is why I look at this as really a disruptive company. And what's I think a third component we hadn't really spoke about is cannabis just happens to be the input material right now, whether that's a root or a bark or something else. The process, as I mentioned, the protocols and procedures we've set in place to take natural products and get them into humans faster and have science behind that that's validated. We've just created an alternative pathway that still follows acceptable protocol today. Cannabis just happens to be our area of expertise and our initial input.
So you're potentially creating a platform.
Correct.
Not necessarily like you said, it's not a cannabis company. Cannabis happens to be the product today.
Correct. Which is really why we've pivoted from saying, when we raised our money at $6 million, I had to be a cannabis company with a blue sky vision of research. When we raised money at $18 million, we were transitioning to a life science company that is deeply immersed in cannabis. Now we are a life science company with a cannabis division.
Right.
And we are moving full steam ahead. So this has been a very strategic, by design, building of the company, strategic capital raises, and pivot in market and industry perception.
Doug, just a follow-up question on the analogy I had about comparing the digital asset space to cannabis today. So I started receiving a lot of calls from financial advisors. Once Scott Miner, the chief investment officer at Guggenheim, said that he saw Bitcoin going to some type of astronomical level. Last week, Elon Musk came out and said that, actually this week, Elon Musk came out and said that they've already allocated $1.5 billion to Bitcoin. And that type of validation by thought leaders in the space really helped it. Who do you look to in the cannabis space as the thought leaders that could really help grow the industry exponentially?
Whether that's the way you're positioned today or where you'll be as a life science company?
There's a number of larger, predominantly Canadian-owned companies who got very deeply immersed into the cannabis sector through cultivation and then MSO acquisition in the United States to create infrastructure. And I think what's most kind of reaffirming, not that we necessarily needed reaffirmation because we've always been a leader since early days here, but what's been really kind of reaffirming to that is almost every one of those guys is attempting to get into the real medical side of cannabis. I think there's been a critical shift in the last 18 to 24 months from a lot of the larger cannabis players to understand that there's more to cannabis industry than actually just selling oil or product or flower, that there's actually a medicinal benefit. Many of them are trying to partner or university partner or research partner to create some infrastructure. And I think that's really where our advantage lies. Our advantage lies on the pathway that we've created that is proprietary to us, that we talk just enough about to hopefully allow folks to understand what we're doing. But there's still there's a secret science behind what we're doing that we're not availing to our competitors at this time.
Understood. So Doug, you've allowed us to chat for quite a bit, and you've given us a good overview on Juva. Before we get out of here, standard last question: anything we didn't touch on that we should have?
I think we covered a good bit of it. At this point, we're trading in the U.S. market under the OTC QB as JUVAF, JUVAF. We're trading in the Frankfurt and on the Frankfurt exchange in Germany, and also in the Canadian exchange on the CSE under Juva.
Is it fair to think you're going to look to get uplisted here in the U.S.?
I think we'll be uplisted we were uplisted from the pink sheets to the QB, and I think we'll eventually be uplisted to the QX. Whether it's not a driving goal, and do we eventually end up on the big board? I think that doesn't happen until cannabis actually has a decriminalization or full legalization on the U.S. side. At the end of the day, I think I'm less concerned about what board or exchange we're on as much as we hit our KPIs that we're specifically looking for. And we're really positioning this company for a full acquisition in the next 36 months.
Excellent.
Okay.
Doug, thanks
a lot,
for
Doug,
coming on. I know we spent, over an hour, and you really went deep. I learned a lot. Chris, you're excellent at what you do. You really got into the weeds there. Thanks for coming on.
Important information. The information provided is for educational and informational purposes only and does not constitute investment advice, and it should not be relied on as such. It should not be considered a solicitation to buy or an offer to sell a security, and you should consult your attorney or tax advisor. All information has been obtained from sources believed to be reliable, but its accuracy is not guaranteed. There is no representation or warranty as to the current accuracy, reliability, or completeness of, nor liability for, decisions based on such information, and it should not be relied on as such. Pinger Systems, LLC, doing business as Resilient Advisor, was compensated for the production of this content.